they're called blind spots because we don't see them, but everybody else does. And so every blind spot has a trigger attached to it. And if you don't know what your trigger is and you don't know what your blind spots are, you are primed to be manipulated by the world. You will not be able to choose your own course because somebody else will choose it for you. My blind spots were large. First, I had an extraordinarily large ego. I truly believed I was the smartest guy in every room. That came from being successful. Once you become successful, you start to live in your own echo chamber, and people will surround you in that echo chamber doing exactly that, continuing to tell you how good you are. At some point, you'll believe it. Once you believe it, then you start to fail. All right, thank you. First, I appreciate being here and be able to talk to you and your audience, Gideon. I'm the No BS executive workplace coach. I'm also a recovering lawyer. I practiced labor law in the city of Chicago for 30 years. I'm also an ex-felon. I went to prison for 5.5 years for committing white-collar crimes, got out in 2001, and decided, since I could no longer practice law, to start a coaching business. I realized in my experience as both a lawyer who practiced trial law in front of juries, and therefore was a really good storyteller, because that's what the deal is with being a trial attorney. You take the jury on a journey. So I took that skill set, but I also took the experience that I'd had being very successful and utterly failing, destroying my career, just about destroyed my life, and recovered from that. And based off of that, I decided I could put together a program that would be beneficial to leaders, because I think leaders often don't acknowledge or do anything to recover from failure. They run away from it. Most people do. Successful people more than most. That's my career in a nutshell. Well, starting from 2001 when I got out of prison. Prior to that, 30 years of practicing law.
Wow. First off, I always admire a concise, well-articulated summary that really covers the essence of a story. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about your experience as a trial attorney, but also like the top communication social media influencer, Jefferson Fisher. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a trial attorney. He has like a TikTok where he talks about like communication skills using like trial, like his experience as a trial attorney. His dad was a trial attorney. His uncles were trial attorneys. His dad was a judge. So like he comes from a family business of storytelling, and all my grandfathers were not trial attorneys. They were tax lawyers, like not the litigious stuff. So I never really thought that the essence of storytelling could come from the justice system, and how if we're going to have you stand trial with your peers, you require an advocate to tell a good story, which I think in the product world, you have to advocate for your work. In your career, you have to advocate for your work and work hard to protect your work from unjust prosecution, assuming you're innocent. And yeah, like it already shows that you have a way with telling a story. My first question when I was preparing for this episode is, one, this is a really amazing story. It's also what I would like to know more about is limiting beliefs. Like what I usually ask this question to guests when they do a big career pivot, or in their career there was like a big hard decision that they need to make, and I'll ask them, what did you have to unlearn? What was like the most important thing you had to unlearn? What was limiting belief? And if you're comfortable talking about it, what was the limiting belief that you had to unlearn? Which sounds like the really hard way.
Right.
Yeah. That like I think caused you to commit a white collar crime. And if not, we could always edit this part out.
Well, not at all. First, I've taken that experience and I've turned it into something positive. So I share it every chance I get. I speak in front of high school groups. I speak in front of law school students all about my experience and what they can learn from it. So when you talk about limiting beliefs, I have a different term for it. I call it blind spots.
Yeah.
Everybody has blind spots. We're born with them, or they're created by our experience early on. And they're called blind spots because we don't see them, but everybody else does. And so every blind spot has a trigger attached to it. And if you don't know what your trigger is and you don't know what your blind spots are, you are primed to be manipulated by the world. You will not be able to choose your own course because somebody else will choose it for you. My blind spots were large. First, I had an extraordinarily large ego. I truly believed I was the smartest guy in every room. That came from being successful. Once you become successful, you start to live in your own echo chamber, and people will surround you in that echo chamber doing exactly that, continuing to tell you how good you are. At some point, you'll believe it. Once you believe it, then you start to fail. At first, you'll do something stupid, but you won't know that it was stupid because nobody will tell you that. The results of it will, if you're smart enough, finally convince you. So I had a huge ego, which made me very susceptible to my clients. Let me also tell you that as a trial attorney, you're an adrenaline junkie. That's what trial attorneys thrive on. You thrive on performance. And see that the trial attorneys are performers. You're in a courtroom, you have a referee that's our judge. You also have a well-informed and very effective opponent. And that's, of course, going to be the other side. So it's a unarmed combat is how I used to refer to it, and I loved it. And I loved being in front of a jury. I loved the communication process, and so I had that built in as an adrenaline junkie. Because when you're not at trial, when you're doing preparation, that's not adrenaline, that's drudge, and I hated it. So I started this, and by the way, I was a sole practitioner. So by the time I finished one trial, I was probably 3 to 6 months out from my next trial. So all of that was prep work. And I had people who did that for me, but I was bored. So I started to seek adrenaline, and I got it from my clients who were not nice people. To be kind, they committed crimes. They committed unlawful acts. They violated the law. I represented them because first, they would seek me out because my nickname at trial was Mad Dog. I would do whatever was necessary to win. Unethical behavior was fine with me. I just looked at it differently. And so I started to associate with people who absolutely were intriguing to me and provided me the opportunity to have that adrenaline rush by participating in their activities. And they were really good criminals, by the way, good grifters. They find your blind spots and your triggers immediately. And they pressed mine right away. I wanted to belong. I came from a broken home, just a sad background, and I needed that. I needed the concept of a group, and they provided me with that. But the initiation fee was committing crimes. So when you look at the activities, that's where I was at. A lot of ego, very intelligent guy, and induced by adrenaline. I went to prison because I'd committed 33 white-collar crimes. And to tell you how group influenced I was, after I had been found guilty I had 2 trials. First trial was a hung jury, means jury could not come to a conclusion. The second trial, I was found guilty. And I was standing in front of the sentencing judge who was going to sentence me to 7 years of incarceration. And he said, I'm going to give you the opportunity to reduce your sentence by 20%, year and a half, 2 years. All you have to do is 2 things. One, you have to admit that you committed the crimes you've been found guilty of. And second, you have to participate with the prosecutor prosecuting those who committed the crimes with you. Now, I've already been found guilty. I'm going to go to prison. And my answer to both of those was no. First, I could not admit I was wrong and got caught. Second, I could not give up the people who were in my group. For 2.5 years, I engaged in revenge fantasy. I was going to get even with everybody who put me in prison. I had accepted no responsibility for my crimes. Here I am, 2.5 years in. You asked for that event, and this is maybe long-winded, but something had to happen. If you have blind spots and triggers, or you have these learned behaviors, something has to break the pattern. Because otherwise, there's no reason for you to change. And up until 2.5 years, my pattern was established, and I was still fine with it. I'm in prison, I'm still okay. But I saw something that started that transformation process, and that is men that had been in prison when I began my sentence and they had left, started coming back. That shocked me, because why would anybody want to come back to prison? It's a terrible place. You don't realize what freedom means until you have it taken away. And so the realization of losing that was there, but I wouldn't accept the responsibility for having lost them. When they started coming back, I realized that if I did not change, if I did not transform, I was going to become a career criminal, because I would return to exactly the same situation I had left. And that was that seminal moment when I decided that I was going to change. A long-winded answer, but that was the process that I got to answer your question.
Yeah. Yeah. What stood out to me was, I think we don't, a lot of ego has nothing to do with the individual, it has to do with belonging and getting validation for your performance. Within my group of professional friends that we continue to work together at multiple companies is a hero ball. Is that the scariest thing you could find in a coworker isn't that they're a malicious, unethical person, but that they believe that they're the good guy. They believe that they're the hero, that they're going to fix everything. Anyone that believes that they're the good person will use anything to justify the means to their ends.
But by the way, everybody has a self-image and
Yeah.
self-esteem, and that's built up over time. First, your own blind spots, but also your environment. Anything that challenges that makes you defensive, and you will
Mm.
resist it. Your environment. Anything that challenges that, difficult it is to breach that defense. It's established and it grows. It gets stronger because you continue to be successful doing what you're doing, being who you are, or at least how you behave. So no, you're spot on about that. I give everyone, I'm a historian. I like history. A
Yep.
conquering general in Roman times was given a parade down the middle of Rome. And in front of them would be the loot that was captured and the prisoners. And then the conquering general, would be in a gold chariot with 6 white stallions. So this was a celebration of his victory. And obviously he was going to feel really good. Every time this happened, the Romans put a slave in the chariot with him. And that slave's job for this whole procedure was to continually whisper in the general's ear, "You are but a man." Because that type of success will overwhelm you and start to convince you that you are more than a man. And that means you think you're infallible.
Yeah. Also sounds like a naggy ant that just like it really just takes the wind out of your sails. That's a really good example. It's like understanding your mortality. I think like any person that performs well, this doesn't sound like too humble, but I'd like to think that I've done pretty good in my career. When I started, it was that if whatever I do works, if I'm effective, then I don't need feedback.
True.
Um, yeah, it's, hey, if like it works, like why do you care so much? Like you wanting me to operate a different way is a values discussion, and it's like it's not about values; it's about getting the job done. And it really hampered my prospects for a while because I just felt like I'd bristle at any type of feedback when I'm like, it's obviously working. So maybe it's if this behavior makes you uncomfortable, doing the unscalable thing is what I would like to do. Historically, it was just like, hey, if I just will into existence the outcome, if it means back channeling, doing the political influence game, doing extra one-on-ones with people outside my department, doing things outside of the typical like process meetings, I'd get feedback that, hey, like this is playing hero ball, this isn't scalable, and like whatever you're talking about in those meetings doesn't make it into these big process meetings. And I'm still struggling with it, but when I decided, like, in the moment for me of when I decided, hey, this is a blind spot for me, thinking that like I have to will it into existence. And in my background, my parents were entrepreneurs, small business owners, and my mom like sold her furniture store like about 10 years ago. But like I grew up like at the furniture store, and she would always catch me like on my phone or just like sitting idle. There's a lot of things to sit on at a furniture store. And she just said, "What are you doing?" Because I'd be like working at the store. She'd be paying me. And I just said, "There's nothing to do. It's slow. There's no customers. The store's relatively clean." And my mom told me, like, this is probably like a seminal moment in like my life. She said, "Caden, there's always something to do." And that point, I was always in activity from that point on, and especially my professional career, I was doing things well outside my job description. And I felt like proud of that because it was like a sense of ownership. At the same time, I would end up working 60-hour weeks. It impacted my mood with my family, my kids, my wife. And I realized like at some point you have to do things through other people. And realize that, hey, there's a reason there's like these process meetings, these like typical best practice meetings, is because if you do it through the proper channels, it gives other people the chance to actually help. And
All of
yeah,
it's good. And obviously, so tell me, you talked about seminal moment. So what was that one thing that, or if there was one thing that you suddenly realized that what you were doing was not working as well as it should?
when I was being short with my kids, like I had like low patience for them. It was basically me just like going at from a work environment where I wasn't suffering incompetence or suffering fools, and then I just didn't turn it off. And so, like, they're young, like they're like I have a 3-year-old, like he doesn't know any better, and I was treating him like a coworker that should know better. And I think it was just like sadness or something like that, where it was just like, I'm just repeating the cycle. Like my mom was like that a lot. She's gotten a lot better. I think it was the undiagnosed ADHD that made her the way she was. The Yeah, like I think that was it for me. This is very recent where I'm like, no, I need to learn how to manage. Like I've been avoiding it for too long.
And yes, you found
Yeah.
something more important than yourself. That's when you change. If you're still self-centered, there's no reason to change. It's when you suddenly realize the impact you're having on others that gives you the necessary strength to break the pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything ends up being a values discussion, right? And that's why at some point, like having something bigger than you, having people depend on you is the unlock to, I think, doing bigger things. Because if people are counting on you to perform and to pull through for them and support them, you can't play hero ball. You can't be the hero anymore. You have to be more of like the guide and like this. You have to be like, eventually you gotta stop trying to be Luke Skywalker. You gotta be Yoda at some point, because if you're only going to accomplish so much unless through other people, if they feel like you could do their job for them, they won't perform as well. Tell me a little bit more about how you came up with the no BS framework, is that, or method, or yeah, and walk me through the process of like how you decided like your next move in your career once you decided that moment.
First, when I got out of prison, I could no longer practice law. My law license would be taken away, and it'll be 13 years before I can get it back. I got out of prison, I was in my 50s.
Yeah.
And therefore, being a 50-year-old white guy who was a expelled did not leave me a lot of room. But as I said earlier, I took my skill sets and I decided I was going to attempt to coach. But I also decided that the concept of coaching to me always felt too soft. And that's not who I am, and therefore that's not how I could coach. I created the concept of being the fool. And the fool comes from the medieval times when kings were anointed by divine power. So God had made you king. Because of that, anybody who challenged the king committed the crime of heresy, and that was punishable by death. The one exception to that was the fool. When we see the fool, they sit at the foot of the throne, they're dressed up in a gaudy outfit, they jump up, dance. We thought they were entertainment. It's not what they were. Because they were seen as being crazy, they had an exception to the rule of being able to tell the king the truth. So that psychological safety allowed them to tell the king when they were behaving badly or making a bad decision. I read about that in prison, and it struck me that was the role of a coach. And that's what I was going to do. When I got out, I thought about the coaching. So I thought, okay, I'm going to present myself as that person that cares enough about you to give you the gift of truth. But that requires that you then participate in the process. That's why the no BS. I think that a lot of people say they want to be coached, they want to benefit from it, but they're not willing to do the hard work. So I can tell you that within 2 years after I got out, I asked one of my clients for a reference. And he said, I'm going to give you two. You pick which one you want. I said, okay. He said, the first one is Paul's an acquired taste, like cyanide. I said, I don't think I'm going to use that one. Give me the second one. He said, Paul is a Sherpa. He will get you to the mountaintop, but he will not carry your pack. That was my theory for coaching, is that I would do what I needed to do to help you accomplish your goals, get to your mountaintop. But once I realized you weren't participating by doing your work, I was out. So I based half of my coaching fee on outcome. So we'd sign a 1-year contract, and if at the end of that 1 year we not accomplish the goals that we mutually set, I only receive 50% of my compensation. I believe I have to have skin in the game. It works for me. If I don't have skin in the game, then I'll let you off the hook. If my money's at stake, I'm going to put my boot up your tail if you're not doing what you've agreed to do. So we develop an action plan. It has action steps. And within that prescribed time, either every 2 weeks or every 30 days, we review the action plan. And if we're moving according to the plan, I celebrate with you. If we're not, then I want to know why. Have you just decided not to do it? Do you want to change your goal? Or have you just decided you didn't have time? Because I think that's the worst excuse in the world. If it's not a priority, you will not have time. But what I'm interested in coaching is, what are your priorities? Because that's what we have to connect the goal to. And once you've told me that's important to you, I believe you until you prove that's not true. And anytime during the coaching process, either one of us can decide to end the coaching process because the other party is not participating appropriately. To me, that's a partnership. It came to me first maybe naturally. I can tell you when I got out, I'd been thinking about this, what I was going to do when I got out. I thought I'll give this a try because clearly my career opportunities were narrow. I knew I would have to do something on my own. Second, I've never played well with others. So I wasn't looking for a job. I was looking for a career. I decided I would try it, and it worked. Today, I have a national coaching practice. My largest customer is a $1 billion distribution organization. It has worked. My style works, but not with everybody. I like I said, I am an acquired taste. Certainly, if you don't like the taste, I'm okay with that, by the way. It's not going to work. I don't want to take your money, and I don't want to waste my time.
That's a perfect example of good strategy when it comes to market positioning. It's, hey, you're very clear what your values are, who you're for, and you're not trying to be everything to everyone, which I really appreciate because I think more businesses should do that. They shouldn't try to be everything to everyone. They'd be trying to focus on really serving a very targeted segment. But it's so interesting that you talk about the medieval fool because I always thought was very interesting. Whenever I talk with mentors or executives or any kind of CEO I've come in contact with, they always talk about having their executive coach. That was like a big part of that career progression is you have to employ a coach. And I'm like, why didn't you do that maybe it was a money thing? Like, why didn't you do that when you're like coming on the come up? Right. And it was probably because you weren't at the top of the hill. And it's so interesting. The interesting thing about human nature is that there needs to be an official position. Once you're at the top of the hill and you have you don't really answer to anyone, but maybe a board or maybe a C-suite executive above you, that you actually need to employ someone that is going to be an objective party. And I think that's the difference between having your own action plan and holding yourself accountable and then getting a coach. What's the difference between Because everything you say is, yeah, have an action plan, SMART goals, all that stuff, right? But what's the difference? How's the coaching add that extra layer?
Because a good coach will push you to the edge, and you won't do that for yourself. I equate it to going to the gym. I have a coach at the gym. I work out because I also
Yeah.
believe in small care. But I do know that coach will not only keep me more focused, but he's going to make me work harder every time. And that's about perform. By the way, I am not a life coach. I am not suited for that. I don't do it. I'm a performance coach. I get
Yeah.
hired to improve performance, and I will push you to the edge. I will not accept mediocrity. And we're going to talk about what as we begin the process, we're going to talk about what superior performance looks like. Because you're right. I start with somebody who's already been successful. Why? They can afford me or the company will pay for it. But the concept is that you've already taken yourself to a higher level than most people, or we wouldn't be talking. The concept that, from my perspective, is you have potential that you have not gotten into, right? You're leaving that on the table. And if you want to be world class, and that's the term I use, everybody can be high performing. You're not, when I talk to a person in the executive, they're already high performing. That's no longer the goal. The goal is you want to be world class. World class requires a much different set of requirements and effort. Most people are happy with being high performing. It's okay. You got me here, and I'm comfortable with where I'm at. I'm well paid. I have respect. By the way, I tell everybody that's your comfort zone. You will no longer get better staying there. If you're not willing to get outside your comfort zone, you cannot get better. Why? You've already gotten there. That's why we call it your comfort zone. So your success is within that. If you want more of that, you have to step outside it. Most people, they find that difficult. I tell people, I don't push anybody out. I step out with you. I nudge you out. But you've got to want it. And if you don't want to do the work, I'm not carrying your pack. I'm going to tell you, you're not fulfilling the obligation that we entered into the contract with. I apologize for that. I should have turned that off.
No issue.
So that's my theory. It's also how I conduct coaching. It's a process that's based upon the desire of the person to make sacrifices to get better, because getting better requires sacrifices. If you're not willing to sacrifice either time, energy, whatever it may be that you've got to give up, then I don't want you in my program. Also, if you're not going to take care of yourself physically and mentally, I don't want you in my program. I believe in self-care. I think it's essential for good leadership. And we have to have a program that you are convincing me that you're taking care of yourself. You cannot be a world-class leader if you don't.
Yeah, there's a maxim that I read in a sci-fi novel that says that there's no good or bad decisions, only the people that make the hard ones. And it was talking about leadership. Red Rising series, really great. But that's what I thought of the reason companies are willing to pay for executive coaching services, because it's crazy. It's wow, like what a cush gig. You're top of the hill. You're probably getting your top of the payroll. And the company's paying for you to be better at the same time. Wow, what a sweet gig. That might not be a good thing if they, I mean, for their ego if they hire you, but I think it's probably a good thing for them in the long run. I always just thought that was like so weird. But when I read this, I think it was the book, the man, I'm gonna have to edit out this pause. The motive. Yeah, the book called The Motive, and it was a book about the CEO that wasn't ready to be a CEO. And at the end of the book, he gets over his ego and actually, like in a merger, steps down into more of a head of revenue role. And the insight about leadership is that most leaders see leadership as a reward. Getting the top management spot is a reward. You've worked hard, you get to cash in. You're gonna have your underlings do your work. You just have to focus on the big picture, enjoy the perks of your job, and you're done. But the reason you're getting paid all that money and you're at the top of the heap is because it's cool. Everything's your fault now. You have to make the hard calls now, and you will. And those hard calls will happen.
And my axiom for that is effective leadership is doing the right thing. That's a hard thing. Everybody can figure out one or two of those. Doing the two together is what makes you successful as a leader. And most leaders are not capable of doing those. Either they don't recognize the right thing or they don't want to do the hard thing. And so that's why coaching, like I said, my coaching is about pushing you to the edge, not over the edge, but to the edge. And that's where improvement outside it happens. But I guarantee you, if you can do it on your own, and by the way, I know there's unique individuals who can do that. No, not many. It's not the norm. That's why coaching matters.
Yeah, and also if you argue that, oh, look, if you're uninformed, you would point out Steve Jobs or Bezos, and ironically, they had the same coach, like Bill Campbell, right? And it's no, you can't really name someone that hasn't had a coach. They like the best of the best. Even like all the tech titans, Bill Campbell is such an interesting example. Is like all the tech titans who are technically with each other, all had like Bill Campbell on their board, and they were all getting coached by the same guy. Just think about like high leverage, maximum influence of this Bill Campbell guy. Like he has the ear of the top executives of these really important companies. It's the fact that like the reason that they're on the top is in some way, shape, or form that they believe in outside perspectives and getting coaching.
Absolutely. Yes. And the more successful you are, the more you need a coach because you start again, success, you can grade it or look at it any way you want. But moving up the ladder normally is not a difficult process.
Yeah.
You have to have the opportunities, obviously, but developing the skill sets of leadership, and that's what leadership is, it's skill sets. So as you develop them, you should be able to get to a certain level. However, by the way, I also do, I offer myself up. I do hourly coaching for people who have it. Why? There's a part of me that said just what you said earlier. At some point, as a coach, you want to give back. And I found that obviously, if you can't afford my services, can I structure if you have a particular topic, we'll talk for an hour. And I'll give you some insights that'll help you make your decision. But for most people, that they do have to get the company to support the process of coaching just because of the expense of the coach. And I see that as being okay. Obviously, I think coaches are entitled to make their money. I know I want mine,
Yeah.
but you have to be providing the value. So at some point, though, you've hit the level where, once again, back to the gym. You go to the gym every day and you can do your workout. But at some point, you realize I could do this better. I could do it faster. And it's going to have the outcome that I'm looking for. So it's a process that everybody gets to as they move up. Through leadership, they realize the need for this outside, you said it, objective source that first has experience that they don't have because you coach somebody else, right? The concept of having a coach who's coached your rival is that you want the benefit of that same input or insight as that successful person over there. You'll get it in a different form. It'll matter differently, but it's still going to be that wisdom and experience that's a part of the coaching process. So I believe that at every level, it's just not affordable at every level. However, I do think artificial intelligence is going to change it. Marshall Goldsmith, world-renowned coach, has put together a artificial intelligence program on his own, and he's the avatar.
Like a GPT, like a custom GPT. Yeah.
Yep. And he's developed it and he's put everything he knows and everything else over 30 years of being a world-renowned coach into this artificial intelligence. And he's offering it for free. So those people who need coaching at a lower level that aren't going to get the company's support, I think that there'll be programs that are suddenly available to them at a reasonable or non-existent cost. So why? Because the need is there. Every level of team leadership You need that coaching. Most team leaders are put into a position that they're not ready to handle, and they struggle. First, you don't want to tell your boss that he made a bad decision or she made a bad decision, because if you have to ask the question about how to do the job, what does that make you look like? That you're not ready for the job, that it was a bad mistake. The second, psychological safety is missing in most organizations. And you can't really tell your boss something that they need to hear because they don't want to hear it, or there's a penalty per se. So we're looking at coaching suddenly becoming available to the masses of people who need it and want it through artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I use Claude for helping out with like by writing when writing like memos, strategy documents. But my favorite feature is just telling it like, hey, here's all the context, be devil's advocate, and just really, and you just turn the dial up. And I think like you, like everyone's using it, and more people are going to use it for that like Socratic method. I mean, like getting pie in the sky is like how the human race is going to get better because we're actually like using AI to create an objective third party for $20 a month or less. And how amazing that is that we're going to have like accessibility of just really good dialogue. And you could have dialogue with something that like a human. So like you don't have the ego issues. You could just say, "Oh, I'm just gonna ignore you," and like you close the chat. Yeah, my like for me it's I live like one of my values is like pay for shortcuts, right? And the affordable option is just taking someone's course if like they have a good content online and you get value from their free stuff. I always try to patronize is not the great term, but I try to be a patron and learn from like paid stuff. And like whenever I have a gap, I'm just like, hey, is there a course I can do? I don't want to learn this the hard way. And I'll just pay the price. Or this podcast is a pretty good example of podcast is a part-time job. It's not. I think you said something earlier about your trial law career where the prep was like torture because you weren't actually like in the arena, right? Like I get so much fulfillment just from these conversations and I grow so much, but then it's like the editing and the producing and the finding the guests but the price, like the sweat equity in that is just so worth it because if I have a larger sample size of people that care about my career intentionally or unintentionally, because I get a lot of like great free advice on the podcast, it allows me to eventually be prepared to have a dedicated person because that's like the plan at some point is to have a dedicated, well, I wouldn't say dedicated, but executive coach. And you brought up a thought that and through like your experience, like working with your clients, the most common blind spots when you engage a new executive or leader.
First, they are trying to do too much too soon to make that impression that they believe is necessary to convince the person who put them in the position it was the right choice. They don't take the time necessary to do what I call the mining of the information that's available. They immediately believe there's a problem, and if there isn't one, they'll even invent one so they can solve it. So I tell everybody, slow down, take a breath, start to talk to the people, and I've got a 90-day program that I new executives take that moves them from the day that they start to that 90-day period where they suddenly have managed to understand the job and the situation and also what they're expected to do. People are promoted for two reasons. One, the company wants them to be a placeholder. They're not interested in change. They want the status quo to remain the status quo. That means it's working well enough. We don't want you to upset the apple cart. The second reason you're promoted is to be a change agent. Now, this can go back and forth, but initially you're promoted for one of those two reasons. And so if you're a change agent, you need to have a better grasp and understanding of what change actually means. You don't get that unless you take the time to interact with the people and understand the situation. Like I said, most new executives are rushing through that, trying to get to an outcome that may or may not be what the company wants, but second, will probably not be effective. What it will be is it'll be an answer that does not solve the problem, puts a Band-Aid on the problem. And that means you're going to revisit it. That's my first thing, is that everybody needs to take a breath, understand what the process is, and let's go through the process. The second thing is I talk seriously about, I am a strong believer that this is an essential part of leadership, and I want you to put together a self-care program. That means you need to convince me you're getting enough sleep, and I don't want to hear any of this crap about 3 hours. That's not enough sleep. And by the way, I'm a research geek on this stuff because I need to convince people that it's not just my opinion. They don't know me when I start a coaching program with a person. They don't know me. When I start talking to them, I need to make sure they understand that just isn't my opinion. It's something that has some objective evidence behind it. Once again, my issue with, or my pride of being a trial lawyer was you took the evidence and you turned it into a story, but you had to have the evidence. No one's interested in the facts. They're only interested in the facts in the context of the story.
Yeah.
And that's what trial is. It's a story. So I continue to use that. And so that's where we start our first 3 to 6 months. Making sure that you're established, making sure that you are using your time and energy effectively. People don't understand how their time and energy is sucked away. So we go through an audit. We do a 30-month, every once a month audit that requires you to take me through a 24-hour day, because we're going to be looking at where you're spending your time and energy and where it can be most effectively used. Delegation is extremely difficult for new leaders. They don't trust people, and they got there by being the doer. See, everybody is promoted because you were doing. Now you're suddenly leading, and that's a different skill set. So the delegation part is extremely important, but very difficult. We talk about that you cannot succeed or survive, and I look at surviving sustainable. You can survive for a while doing things that aren't going to work long term. If you want sustained success, and I also legacy, because you're probably going to stay in this position for 3 years. Right now, the average executive is moving every 2.5 years. So what are you trying to accomplish? Because that's where we get to develop the plan. So all of that gets in. That's see, I know it feels like a fire hose, but that's how the conversation goes for the first 30 days.
This is gold because most problems can be chalked up to a prioritization problem, which is your first point. They don't know how to prioritize, so everything's a problem and it needs to be fixed right now. Or if everything's going well, it's too boring. I need to make up a problem.
Yep.
And then the second point is, or it could be chalked down to an energy problem. Maybe you are doing well, like you are prioritizing well, but you're self-medicating. You're not regulating yourself, and it's just because you're not doing healthy self-care, like going to the gym and walks and pausing, doesn't mean you aren't treating it. You're just treating it in a way that actually hurts you in the long run. You're like, you're using your body's credit card to use alcohol or drugs to get through your responsibilities. But yeah, that really resonates with me.
And you put in one more aspect of this, that when we get to self-care, is
Yeah.
how you're interacting with your family. People who are promoted sacrifice family first. And that is a short-term, it's an ignorant way to look at it. Your family is your support base outside of work. They are the ones that you should care about more than the job. So don't shortcut them. So we have that discussion about as we look at the situation. By the way, I advocate having 2 phones, a work phone and a personal phone. And I advocate turning off the work phone, and that freaks people out. They're like, oh my God, I can't do, there's this thing called voicemail. You'd be shocked how it works. You don't have to answer the phone. It will leave the message and you can get to it. And some people are not capable of that, making them understand it works. This is something that will work. It's working for other people. I know they're in my program. And if we start that habit early on when they first step into the position, it becomes a habit and they're okay with it. Family time is sacrosanct. You get to establish what that is, but then you have to, I don't want to hear that you've decided that's no longer valuable. I understand the exception. Right? By the way, travel is the worst productivity suck ever. It's the thing that probably hurts executives more than anything else. And so we talk about that. We talk about the concept of controlling. If you don't control your time, someone else will. Everyone believes they don't have to do that. No, you're wrong. You do. You just have to believe it before you can do anything about it. By the way, if you've got a boss that's that bad that you can't talk to them about how your life needs to be structured, you need a boss. And people don't like to hear that either. Like the money. Oh, it's all about the money until it's not. So anyway, there's a whole spiel that I've got based on experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
Well, yeah. Make
Yep.
make them pay for the good stuff, man. Like we don't have to we don't have to share all the cheddar. Like I realized that, especially like executives, I think there's like a Jeff Bezos quote, is that like your job as an executive is max 5 good decisions a year. That's plenty of time to strategize. Like you want like big, decisive, strategic wins. You don't want to be looking busy, but like the reason you get into an executive job is because you were busy, you were on top of things, you were actually like covering for your boss's problems, you were covering the gaps in their leadership. But the reason that you were covering the gaps in their leadership is that they were probably a poor leader or a manager, and you internalize that, oh, because I was filling in their gaps, I was covering for them, this is what it means to be at that level. And it's not. Like you have to, like, prioritization means you are letting things drop on purpose because you know that there's a more definitive down the line. Paul, do you feel like there's anything that hasn't been said that should be said before we sign off, and how can people find your work?
Actually, no. I think I've enjoyed the conversation. And
Me
I always
too.
that's my first thing. Second, I think you asked appropriate questions that allowed me to say what I wanted to say and what I think your audience would find value. So no, I'm cool.
Wow. Yeah, you're comprehensive, and I think anyone that's listening that is in a rut, or even if they like on paper they're not in a rut, but we know you're in a rut, I would encourage anyone that's ready to make that next step to look at Paul's work. How can they find it? It's maybe just like your LinkedIn profile is probably the best place to find
Sure.
links, or
And Paul at paulglovercoaching.com, but then the LinkedIn. Yeah, it's Paul Glover Coaching. So certainly that's how people can get in touch with me. I encourage it. Obviously, I'm always interested in what people are doing and whether or not I can do something to assist.
well, Paul, thank you so much for the time. You have a good one.
Also, thank you.
Hey listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.